Happy Advent and early Merry Christmas to everyone listening. I'm so excited today to be chatting with my good friends, Gretchen Ronnevik and Katie Koplin from the Freely Given podcast about the Advent season and this idea of Christ coming not only once in the incarnation, which we know happens at Christmas, but the way that he comes to us now in Word and Sacrament, and the way that he has promised to come again in his second coming. These are the three comings that make up the Advent season that we celebrate and we look at during this time of the year. So today our conversation centers around that and how this expansion upon Adventus and the coming of Christ is a really beautiful thing. It's a very hopeful thing, especially in seasons of darkness, during the darkest time of the year, and during times where our sin feels as if it's overwhelming us. I hope you enjoy today's show. This is Outside Ourselves. I'm Kelsi Klimbera. Thanks so much for listening. Hey guys, happy Advent, Christmas-ish seasons.
Pulled this sweater out of the top of my closet today.
Yeah, we're going to pretend that this is the season we're in because we're recording a little bit early, but this will come out probably mid-Advent of this year. So that's what we're here to talk about. I'm here with Gretchen and Katie from the Freely Given podcast. I always make people introduce themselves on my podcast because it's easier. So do y'all want to do that? You want to talk a little bit about who you are and what you do as we get started? Gretchen's been on Outside Ourselves before, but Katie has not. So would love if you guys want to kind of chat a little bit about yourselves and then we can get started.
Katie,
Gretchen, you go first.
Oh, shoot. I almost said that.
I was quicker. I was quicker.
So I am Gretchen Ronnevik. I am a writer and I travel around and speak places. I have 6 kids, though they're getting older. We have 5 at home right now. 2 of them are now adults. And let's see, we live on a farm. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else to say. And co-host of the Freely Given podcast.
Yeah.
And you wrote a book?
Right.
I wrote a book, Ragged, Spiritual Disciplines, Spiritually Exhausted. I'm like, I was a writer. I included it.
So I'm Katie. I live not that far from Gretchen. So usually we get to record in person. A little fun fact about the Freely Given podcast. Because Gretchen, the town closest to Gretchen is also the town that's closest to us that has a Walmart.
Yeah.
So there you go.
The big city.
Got to go to Walmart.
Yep. We go to the big city for Walmart. And I am a co-host of Freely Given. I also write and speak with 1517, which is super fun. I recently started grad school to be a mental health counselor, a licensed mental health counselor. And we have 4 kids. My husband works in agronomy, so he's not a farmer like Gretchen's husband, but works with people like Knut.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep ourselves plenty busy with all the kids' sports. So,
and you guys, you've been doing Freely Given for 2 years? Is it over 2 years now?
3.
I think 3 now.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Because I would have said 2, but I recently had to look to put on my resume how long we'd been doing it.
Yeah.
And it was August of 2020 we released our first episode.
Yeah. It was.
Oh wow.
It was 2020. Yeah. When everybody was starting a podcast, actually, probably that year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now everyone has a podcast. Tell me a little bit more, or tell us a little bit more. I'm sure probably more people listening to this know y'all's podcast than mine, but just about the format for Freely Given and your goals with it, because it is, as far as 1517 content, I think it's a little bit special, and it's not just because you're women. I think that the content is a little bit special.
I think I think what differentiates us from the other 1517 podcast is we're very vocational.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And the other ones do get into that. But maybe it's just because I like to talk about vocation. So that's I just force Gretchen to talk about it. But
Well,
and when people ask me to describe it, I always just use our tagline. Our purpose is to increase faith and freedom rather than guilt and slavery. So
yeah, I
Which is a
think
great tagline.
even though even though I know that because we're women isn't what makes it special, but that I think freedom of the Christian isn't really discussed in female spaces as often. I think
Yeah.
because of the vocation element. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think that the drive, at least that I have behind it, is just to make sure that women do understand the freedom that they have in Christ and the freedom that they have, which affects their vocation. And I
mm-hmm.
think a lot of times people are unaware of how genderized we make our theology. And
Yes. Yeah.
and so I think we want to point out things that and point back to what is true, point back to good theology where we sometimes go in weird places. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you guys do a great job of that. And you do it at a level that, everyone can understand, which is really, really nice. Like it's a good opening door for whoever wants to listen.
I am not
So
an academic.
And she has
neither am I,
a wonderful
Katie.
laugh. Wonderful laugh. So,
Yes, the best laugh. The best laugh. Well, I'm so glad that y'all are here today. We are, like I said, we're talking about the Advent season, and I think or not most, a lot of people's understanding of Advent, I would say, I feel like has expanded in a good way in the last few years. People are more interested in church seasons, liturgy, which is really great. And maybe I say that too because my understanding of Advent has definitely expanded in the past few years as well. But it is something that I think is still not completely understood by a lot of people. And then as we've been kind of talking about this episode to prepare, I think one aspect that's pretty new to me is that Advent is this idea of coming. Adventus, the Latin word, means coming, but it's coming in three parts, right? So we tend to kind of think of it as like Christmas is coming. We're preparing for the birth of Christ, which is definitely true. That's a part of it. But there's actually two other comings, this idea that Christ comes to us so that would be the coming of Christ in the incarnation, the already he has come in that way. Christ comes to us now in word and sacrament. And then he has not yet come, but we are preparing for his second coming on the final day when when he will resurrect the dead and catch up everyone who is alive, and we will be with him for forever. So anyway, all that to say, there's this sense of like three comings. What are y'all's thoughts about that? Has that been your understanding? If it hasn't always been your understanding, has that kind of enlarged understanding of Advent changed anything for you in the past few years, or I don't know, whenever you've discovered that?
Yeah, for me, I grew up Lutheran, so the idea of Advent, liturgical Lutheran too. So has always been there, but like with everything with scripture and with church, you don't really get it as a 13-year-old.
Right.
So definitely a deeper understanding, and just like you, Kelsi, a richer understanding that it's also talking about Christ coming again.
Mm-hmm.
I have a tendency to avoid like the book of Revelation just because it gets interpreted in so many unique and interesting ways. So, but Advent is a time where it would be a great time to read the book of Revelation. But yeah, so I think we're always going to grow in our understanding of these things. A song that I discovered a couple years ago by Rain for Roots. It's children's songs, but they have one called Mary Consoles Eve, and they talk about that concept in there,
Mm.
almost not yet already. And within the context of it's Mary talking to Eve about Jesus.
Hmm.
And that picture, I love that so much.
Can you kind of describe because I don't know that song. Like, what is the conversation? Like,
It's just
what is she saying?
essentially she's saying, yeah, Eve, we are living in sin now, but Christ is coming.
Hmm.
And it talks about Eve, my sister. Oh, I should have looked up the lyrics, Kelsi. But
We
and
can
that
link to
he's
it.
coming, and it will all be okay because of his interaction with us.
Okay.
So,
That's really cool.
and there's also that image, like I even have a tattoo of it, and I'm looking at it in my office right now, of Mary and Eve together, and that communicates a lot of the same things of that song, that they both know that sin is there. Like Eve looks really dejected, but they're both concentrating on Mary's belly and who is in there and what is to come.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's part of Gretchen and I's podcast too. Like that's a beautiful thing when women can console each other with the gospel instead of just another inspirational message. If it's in the season of Advent or whatever season.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there is the thread of a huge thread for Advent is obviously the promises of God and how those play out in the fulfillment of them that has happened that we stand on. In for us, the incarnation. For Eve, she was waiting for that to happen. And that, I think, kind of helps propel us forward to hope in the future fulfillment of those promises that we have not yet seen, which is so cool. I don't know, there's so much here. And Gretchen, there's so much here with like time and patience and waiting, which is, I know, the theme we talked about when you were on last time, and something I know you're writing about right now. So how has that kind of played out for you?
Well, I didn't grow up in high church Lutheran, very, very low church. It Advent was something that became important to me as an adult. I would say I think that the idea of waiting for Christmas was basically, waiting for presents. We had an Advent
Yeah.
calendar in our
Mm-hmm.
in our home growing up, and it was just kind of like some felt ornaments that would go on a felt tree, and you added one every day. And then, sometimes we'd have like a chocolate Advent calendar where you ate a piece of chocolate every day. And so I
Mm-hmm.
didn't really associate Advent with coming. I associated Advent with, okay, this is the really hard waiting portion for the presents. And I think as an adult, we started doing a Jesse tree with our kids, just going through the whole plan of salvation through the Advent season, because I think as a parent, you start realizing that this whole season is very commercialized, and you want to give something to your kids that they can sink their teeth into. But
Mm.
but at the same time, we were talking before about Fleming Rutledge's book on patience, not on patience, on Advent, is very much of an end times type of, like, the idea of Advent that I thought I was putting together is actually bigger and deeper than I could have
Mm.
imagined. As an adult, I have come to maybe a bigger understanding of what Advent is, besides just preparing for Christmas or preparing for the presents, or um, even just recalling the story of the Bible. There's this bigger story on repeat, that what God has done, He is doing, and He will continue to do.
Mm.
But in the context of patience, it seems like patience isn't a feeling that you have, but almost this stage in God's story that we're in. We're in this
Mm.
patient time where we are living in the already but not yet, and that is hard. And how do you live out that hope? And yeah, it's definitely a much bigger topic than I had initially thought with the candies, though I still get the candy advent. So
The candy advent calendars are great. I'm all for
yeah.
those. There is this tension between like the preparation and the waiting of the season. And Fleming Rutledge, you mentioned her book. She has a great Advent book, and she says all the Advent preparation in the world would not be enough unless God were favorably disposed to us in the first place, which I love that idea of like we can prepare as much as we want. And then right after that, she goes into this story about how the Reformation kind of changed how people approached Advent, because in the Roman Catholic view, like there was all this emphasis around preparing and feasting, and which is great. Like there's some good to that. But then Martin Luther came in and was just like proclaiming God's promises over and over again. And she has a quote from him. She says, it was not a quote. She said that he poked fun at the Roman focus on preparation, saying Jesus might very well return while people were drinking fine wines and not praying a word. And kind of, I think the shift from an emphasis on preparation to waiting is hard for us in any aspect of the Christian life, but especially during a season where there's so much to prepare just for the day of
Yeah.
Christmas is difficult. I don't know.
Well, it was such a physical reminder for me. My younger two daughters were both born during Advent, and so they not twins, just 2 years apart, but both during Advent. And there's this idea of waiting for a birth that is so unnerving that,
Yes.
as you know very well,
Yeah.
but waiting for a birth that's so unnerving, and you'll get the Braxton Hicks contractions, and you will get all the preparation as your body is preparing for this birth, and you're like, is this it? Is this it? No, that's not it. Is this it? And then we like go around and we busy ourselves doing all the things that the nesting that you think that you're supposed to do, but this
Yeah.
birth is going to happen whether or not you are planning or preparing for it. It's something that actually happens to you. I mean, there's a sense of participating psychologically, maybe, but I've always seen birth as something that I don't have control over. And I think
Yeah.
that there's something to Advent that does I mean, you have all the readings, you have Mary's song. There's something quintessentially rooted in birth and new life in Advent that that I think it's really interesting when you physically go through that to connect that to what's going on in Advent is really shows how tangible God is in a lot of his
Yeah.
messages.
Mhm.
Very
Well,
tangible, very physical, very
I was gonna-
story-like.
the physicality of it. Our
Yeah.
bodies are definitely involved in the birthing process.
Yeah.
And you think about that in terms and in light of the incarnation, and
Yeah.
very obvious that God cares about our physical bodies also.
I mean, it happens to our bodies. Our bodies are totally involved, but we don't cause the contractions to start or end. And
Yeah.
it's like being on a race course where you don't have the controls to the speed or the inclines or anything. And that can be very Advent-like of just this
Yeah.
idea there's someone coming.
Yeah.
And
There's someone coming, and it's a good thing, but there's going to be pain in the process. There's so many ties. I mean, right now my Discover feed on Instagram is just a million 9 months pregnant women doing hip circles on a exercise ball. Like, I cannot tell you how many women in their underwear I've seen in the last 9 months on social media, and I'm ready to not see any more that have just given birth. Um, anyway, I'm saying all that to kind of get to what y'all are talking about of like, you can prepare all you want. We can think we're in control of this as much as we want. And this is, you guys just did a few podcasts on this idea of birth and how much righteousness we can find as women in that whole process. In reality, we're so much less in control of it than we think we are. Like you said, Gretchen, we don't start it. we don't stop it. And I think that that's really interesting. I always think too, I don't know why, when I was like thinking about this episode and preparing, the parable of the 10 virgins kept coming to mind. And that parable used to scare me a lot because, you know, the 5 foolish virgins get locked out. They're not prepared or whatever. But I was rereading it and I don't think I realized until I reread it like yesterday that there's 5 that are wise. There's 5 that are foolish. The wise virgins have oil for their lamps. They're waiting for the bridegroom. The foolish do not, but they all fall asleep waiting for the bridegroom, like all of them. It's not like the 5 wise ones are staying awake, being anxious and trying to control everything. Like they all have to wait, and they all end up falling asleep, which is kind of a comfort of like this time of the now where we are waiting Christ's return, is not meant for us to just be busy for the sake of being busy or being in control. Like there's a lot that we can't do, and we just have to deal with that.
Has a lot less to do with what we're doing and a lot more with what God's doing through us and in us.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Go ahead.
when you understand that your righteousness comes from outside of you, and God has given you, told you not to fear, and to give you freedom and rest, and telling you all of that, I think sometimes this call to be really busy in preparing, it makes you feel almost guilty for resting in all of that. And I love that story that they all rested. I told a story once when we were in Las Vegas about my sister and how she used to fold her hands when we were praying, when she was sleeping, because she was afraid if God came back or Jesus came back in the middle of the night, he would see her sleeping, like praying instead of sleeping. Because she was just like so scared about that. And she was just like, I'm going to get to heaven before you because I'm praying and he's going to take me first. And just this idea that, which was like hilarious. We were like little kids at the time, but just this idea that you have to appear like you are working, like we're going to somehow trick God, and not understanding that no, our rest and our righteousness and all of that comes from him. When you realize the foundational of that makes Advent look really different. That Advent isn't about appearing busy and preparing all the time.
There's another aspect, and we've kind of touched on it, but there's another aspect of Advent, I think, when you kind of expand it out to this fuller version that is very dark. It's apocalyptic, like we were talking about, like Katie mentioned, reading Revelation, not a bad idea. And it's another thing. Fleming, wish she was here. She should be joining us. Talks about a lot in her book. She uses the example of Cormac McCarthy's novels and how they're such a good example of hopelessness. Like they're so dark so often. I don't know if y'all read any of them?
I want to say I've read one, but now I'm trying to remember which one it was.
And All the Pretty Horses is not dark, but I just read I listened to The Road this year, and that book is the darkest book I've ever read. But because it's so dark, there's so much hope in it, because you see this. It's about a man and his son in an apocalyptic setting. They're just literally trying to survive. And you see what you end up seeing is this dad, this father, doing everything he can to help his son survive. And it's so bleak that it makes like that fact and that reality shine all the brighter, which I think is really, really interesting. Like this reflection of how dark things can be, can actually lead us to, if we have a promise of hope, it can lead us to a brighter understanding of that. What do you guys feel about that? How does that hit you?
I think that's really similar to there's a little mini parable in it, but the story, the account of when Jesus forgives the sins of the woman of the city, tells to her, your sins that are many are forgiven. And he tells the people around him that she understands forgiveness. And it's not that she's a worse sinner or that they haven't sinned as much. It's not like they all need to go find a prostitute. But when you see the depths of sin, the goodness of Christ only shines brighter.
Yeah.
I mean, that's definitely been my life experience. As a kid, I grew up going to a Lutheran school. I didn't really think I was that bad, right?
Yeah.
You make some mistakes in life and you go, oh, yeah, Jesus is kind of a big deal.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
The the recognition of our sin, and not that you have to make more of it than it is. You don't need to wallow in that. But
Right.
when you really see it, you go, this Jesus thing is pretty cool. So, and
Yeah.
when we're living, it's that almost not yet already part two. Like, the three of us understand forgiveness, but that doesn't mean we don't feel the effects of sin and the weight of that, whether it's
Yeah.
our sin or the sin that somebody has done to us. Or I think too, my friend Heidi talks about this, like just the sin in the world that we can't put our finger on. We feel the
Yeah.
weight of that. And you see those things and hope shines brighter then.
Mm-hmm. And we our theology kind of allows us to, like you said, understand that, but we don't always even feel that hope.
No,
And yet
exactly.
that's like what's so amazing about, I think, God's promises is that in having faith in them and having faith in Christ, we do trust that they're true even when we don't feel them, even in the darkest, moments. I like what's going on right now with Israel, and having that go on and expecting this baby for me is like it feels very similar to I had my first baby during COVID, like right as COVID started. And it was the same, like this crazy tension of like, this is so good and this is so hard.
Mm-hmm.
And what's happening? You need something to stand on during that time, even if you can't feel it. Like, even if the feeling of it is not coming through,
Mm-hmm.
trusting that something greater is some greater hope is out there, I think is essential. I don't know how people get through life without that. I don't know.
I don't
It's
either.
hard.
Especially like you
Yeah.
were saying, I think the world news had way more impact on me when I was pregnant. Now my
Oh
kids,
yeah.
world, like they're here, but there is something to that, seeing the ickiness of the world when you're pregnant.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember with our first, it was just maybe 3 years after 9/11, and we were in the midst of the Afghan war. And I remember thinking the same thing, like, is there going to be another attack? Was kind of imminent.
Mm.
Um, I think that the themes of light and darkness that you brought up are just, it's so huge. And I know it's been said before, but just the idea that John says that the light has come into the darkness and the darkness has not understood it or has not comprehended it or overcome. And just this idea that I think about the star over where Jesus was born. And it almost seems like it's so in your face. It's so like obtuse that you like, it's almost childlike in God's like painting the picture of what's going on here,
Mm-hmm.
where there's just this incredible darkness of space and the sky, and but as big as the darkness is, a light can overcome it, just like one light, and how
Yeah.
endearing that is, and how the
Yeah.
darkness can fight back the light if it wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Just almost like the power dynamics between
Yes.
darkness and light.
That
Um,
is my favorite picture, because you think about if you were in a completely dark room, and we probably all have this experience, even if it's not with a match, you light a match, that match is so dark. But think about even when you're laying in bed and it's pitch black and you look at your phone and it's even on dim, like that light, you can
it's
see it
over.
from way far away.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
blinding. It doesn't mean you can differentiate anything around you. You can't make a solution. Your eyes can't see anything around you, but that light cannot be overcome.
Yeah. I know that. I think that that's what I was trying to kind of get at too with this, these thoughts about like the road, Cormac McCarthy, the way he writes is like, you just need a pinhole of light.
Mm-hmm.
And that is enough, which is so crazy. That is really a crazy kind of thing to experience and to see happen over and over again, whether it's, you know, in narrative or in life or in the narrative of scripture. I think there's also something I'm kind of shifting here, but I think there's something that seems specific to our, you know, the theology that we kind of, I would say we all confess, Reformational Lutheran theology, in the sense that we don't just have this example of what's God has already done, and we don't just have the hope in what he will do, but we have the actual promises of God. Like, we believe the promises of God are ours now in word and sacrament, and that they do change us. Like, we do have the reality of our justification. We are saints in the middle of being sinners. That's really incredible. How does that kind of change for y'all, this understanding of the already not yet?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is the impact it has on our when our vertical relationship is completed by Christ, like the impact it has on our horizontal relationships. So having that justification, knowing I'm secure in Christ, means that I can look at my shortcomings and sin very honestly
Yeah.
and very intensely. And that creates empathy, sympathy, whichever one you want to use. I'm in counseling classes right now, so I really am watching my words. But, on how we interact with other, and being able to look at the sin of another and know that there's redemption for that. Like, not that it's coming from me, it's coming from outside of all of us, but it's not coming from me. It might come through me, but not from me. And that drastically changes how we view our neighbor and our service towards them, I think. It has for me anyways.
Yeah. What would you say are some tangible ways that has changed how you view people?
Yeah, I think it reduces my shock value. So when somebody comes to me with something they're struggling with, I'm not shocked, because I can see that, yeah, given the right circumstances, I would do the same horrible thing.
Yeah. Sin is not a surprise.
Yes. Yeah. And I think being able to be a person that someone can confess to and hear absolution from is pretty much all I have to give anyone that's of worth. So,
Yeah. Do you feel like it's changed how people approach you?
yeah. Yeah.
And in what way?
I
Because
mean,
I feel the same, but
yeah, that's definitely my hope anyways, especially, so here's a really specific example, practical. tangible. Gretchen and I do our podcast, and then I substitute at the schools. Well, the kids know that. They hear the podcast. They've heard me talk about these things, so they will approach me with big questions. And I just, I think it changes your demeanor when you're not, when you know the depths of your own sin. I think it's called humility. um,
Yeah.
and, uh, and it's all spirit created. It's not me doing this, right?
Yeah.
Um, you're actually free to love your neighbor
Mm-hmm.
in this nasty situation we're in of the fulfilled promise, but sin still exists.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and it enables us to walk in truth. I find that when you start, that practicing absolution and not being shocked by sin, and your neighbors kind of catch wind of that, or at least start to understand that, people start coming up to you and just sharing all of these wild things that they wouldn't share with anybody else.
Yeah.
Um, and that has been happening more and more. And I think that the main reason for that is that there's not many places where you can walk in the light with whatever you're struggling with, because I mean it's such we are quickly accelerating into a culture of shame,
Yeah.
a
Mm-hmm.
shame-based culture,
Yeah.
and so just this idea of, if anyone finds this out, my life is going to be over.
Right.
And to have someone being able to walk in the light and walk in truth, and receive that absolution, is actually this hope that that people are just craving. But
Mm-hmm.
people think that walking in the truth means standing up for whatever is right, which means shaming whatever is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so there, it becomes this shame culture that actually puts all of the sin into hiding, and sweeps
Yeah.
it under the rug, and makes you pretend that it's not there. And then people start living a lie to just
Mm-hmm.
try to keep up appearances and stay within the community. And um, what what walking in the truth means is something totally different.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because it's not what I think we think it, like, I think when people hear that, they tend to think like, oh, it means like behaving correctly or doing the right thing all the time, which is not what it is. But what do you mean by walking in the light, um, especially in the reality that we all have sin that we have to deal with, or
Yeah.
we're dealing
I
with.
think, there's always that tension that people have. You especially see this with like angry Christians on the internet, but just this idea of, um, what I'm saying is true, therefore it's loving. So I can say it in
Mm-hmm.
whatever manner I want to say it in, because the
Yeah.
truth is loving by nature. And I think First Corinthians 13 would talk a little differently about that, about how you can speak in all wisdom and all knowledge, but if you don't have love, it's completely worthless. And so I think it's this false dichotomy of, when it ceases to be loving, it ceases to be true.
Hmm.
And when it ceases to be true, it ceases to be loving. It's both and two very important pieces. So walking in the truth is something incredibly difficult to do without love, because if because you're exposed, and all your sin is exposed, and no one wants to walk in truth when there is no love there. And so
Yeah.
that's the miracle of grace. That's part of the miracle of the incarnation, is that um, he's the embodiment of what is absolutely true and what is absolutely loving, in a
Yeah.
very tangible way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Love propels the truth. Like, because without love, we are going to choose to remain, not only choose to remain in shame, but be left in shame, because there's no place to bring our sins and bring the truth in which it's dealt with properly, I guess.
Yeah.
And that kind of
Well,
gets to that idea of absolution that Katie was talking about too, I think.
I think like shame is a very immediate feeling. I think the need for love is a deeper feeling than that. It's a little harder to, like, I think about with kids, when they did something they weren't supposed to do, I can even guarantee them their forgiveness. I can guarantee, just tell me what's true. Like, let's just get this out in the open. And they are just terrified. They don't want to let go of their self-justification and hold on to the justification of something else. And just this idea that it truth and shame can be very immediate. Love is something that is sustaining. It is something that always has been. It's something that always will be. It's something that always um, that is right now. And so I think that's the part of truth that we have to experience to know, and it just has to be on repeat on our broken brains. And yeah, I'm just making it up as I go along. So
Aren't we all? Aren't we all?
So what you said there, Gretchen, kind of triggered a thought. When the woman, and I just wrote about this for a retreat coming up, so that's why it's so like right here. But the woman who comes to Jesus and washes his feet, she doesn't give a full confession of her sins before he forgives her. He declares her forgiven before she goes on to list everything that she's ever done. And I think there's something to that. You have to know you're forgiven before you can actually look at your sin. And I know that seems kind of backwards, like it's, you confess and then you're absolved. But I don't think we have the freedom to confess until we know we're forgiven.
well, like, why would you confess?
Right.
If
I'm probably
there's no hope?
I'm trying to talk about it too formulaic, but I think it.
Well, yeah. What's interesting is like the law brings us to repentance, right? Like we believe that. And the gospel only then can come in and forgive us. And yet we see, you see throughout all of Jesus's ministry, he's forgiving people left and right without them confessing. Like he's like, oh, you're hurt and lame. Your sins are forgiven.
Yeah.
Like what?
And like Jesus, he kind of knows things, so he knows everything already.
Right. Right.
I think there's some beauty in that to say, because I think confession is also a cathartic thing that we can do. Like it's just good for us to do. But sometimes we can get so worried that we're not going to, I used to worry about this anyways, that I wasn't doing it well enough. I wasn't during that quiet time, during public confession, at church. If I didn't like list all the things in my head quick, did I actually get them forgiven?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is an interplay, between like the need to, like you're saying, Katie, the need to know that there is a promise that stands for you and is yours, like already's been given to you.
Yeah.
While also understanding like the reason that you're a sinner, the reason you're named a sinner is because we have the law, and maybe it's just less. I think maybe we try to make it a little bit more like this happens and this happens. It's like we try to make timeline it, and that's the thing that we get that's not super clear always, is like we know which one causes which. It's just like what's happening first is not always super
we
clear.
know the law. We know the law has its function. We know the gospel has its function, but can I put it on a linear timeline? Like God works outside of time, right?
I don't think linear is how a lot of these things work.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm just trying to, I'm trying to not be an Agricola here. So that's why I'm bringing all this up. But
no, that's great. Because it's something that people think about though, and they hold a lot of shame and guilt over.
Yes.
So it's an important conversation to have.
A confession is basically crying out to the Lord. And like, think of all the ways that we cry out, that we even have shame in how we cry out. Like whether it's complaining or whether it's it's being frantic because you're afraid you're going to be found out. And there's just that panic within you. And
Mhm.
you shout out a prayer of mercy. And I mean, would people consider that a contrite confession? I think when you're in the moment, it doesn't always feel like it. You feel scared, you feel panicked.
Mhm.
But I
Yeah.
think that's where mercy is so necessary, and God knows that.
This is not off topic, actually, because I think the other thing about Advent that has maybe been forgotten a little bit is that historically it is kind of a time of penitence. It's much more similar historically to like Lent, in the season of Lent, than we give it, because we tend to kind of rush through this reflection of sin and darkness to the preparation for Christmas. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but there's a part of Advent that's very dark, and literally it's happening at the darkest time of the year, which I also think is interesting. So,
Yeah, both Advent and Lent are looking forward to new life.
yeah.
So they,
Yeah.
they share that in common.
Yeah.
So, and
Absolutely.
when you're looking forward to new life, you're still living in sin, right? Like
Right. Yeah.
that's that. I stopped myself at living in sin because usually that means one thing, right? But like sin still clings to us as we're looking forward to new life.
Yeah. We're living and we're surrounded by sin. So,
Yeah.
and I think too, the other like just realistic thing is for people that we forget is that Christmas time, the holidays are often just a really hard time for people in general. If you have good family, or you have, kids like we all do that are growing up, that might not necessarily be the case. It could be the case, but it's a hard time for a lot of people who struggle with depression, who are separated from their families, either by, physicality or just by stuff that's been going on. And I think that that's an important thing to remember as we kind of like walk through this season and try to serve our neighbors. It's not all Merry Christmas and jingle bells for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, I think the purpose behind Advent lends itself to that in the looking forward to new life.
yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
and being able to look like Gretchen and I say, and obviously this is not our phrase, but we say it a lot on Freely Given, just calling a thing what it is.
Yeah. We so often want to rush through the pain, or rush through talking about the pain, or rush through acknowledging the darkness, because we just want to skip to the good part and skip to the happy part. And I think part of that is from a church growth, even uh, evangelistic way, where we're like, okay, well, we can't like have a church holiday where we're just waiting and sad or thinking about things, or it's not the happy thing that we want to advertise that church is. But honestly, I think it's something that a lot of people in the culture are aching to have this reality of already but not yet acknowledged, and the
Mm-hmm.
waiting hard times acknowledged. um and by skipping to the end, we miss the opportunities to show the depth of which Christ has reached.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think it's one way or the other so often in culture. Like, we're either totally hopeless, everything's terrible, everyone's terrible, um, there's nothing you can do about it, or we're skipping ahead to everything we're skipping ahead to everything that's.
The light shines
Honest,
in the darkness, Kelsi. Your lamp is still
I
on.
was going to cut it out, but now I'm leaving it in. It's just going to be a part of the episode. If you're listening, my light just cut off. It's fine. My beauty light. Yeah, I think that there's it's either or for us. It's so the tension part is just something that is always going to be hard to wrap our head around us. So we have to have it told to us over and over and over again, because it's hard and difficult to understand. It's hard and difficult to trust during that. This is probably going to come out kind of towards the end of Advent, but are there any resources for Advent or Christmas that you guys would recommend that have been helpful to you, that you would want to pass along for people?
One that I've used with my kids is Elise Fitzpatrick and her daughter wrote
Jessica.
and we've used that one in the past. We are all over the place when it comes to Advent things. Like some years we make a wreath and do it. Some years we make a wreath and then it goes in a drawer. So
yeah, sometimes we have a spiral candle thing where Mary goes on each day, and
Okay.
we haven't done that in 2 years because I keep forgetting. But
I just really enjoy the darkness and the light of the Christmas tree. I mean, just that space. It is my favorite. So.
I love coming down. Well, growing up, we had. I don't have a 2-level house now, but growing up, our rooms were upstairs, and I loved coming downstairs in the morning when it's still dark and having the tree lit up. I've never even thought about that as really like a theological connection. I love that. That's great.
I like this. I really enjoy going to bed at like 8:00 at night. So I love winter.
You can actually see it. I don't have any book recommendations. We have been all over the place with that. We have done the Jesus Storybook Bible with our kids through an Advent reading before. Yeah, again.
I got one. Lex and Press has a Christmas one, right? The Fat Cat one. The King.
They do the King of Christmas. Yeah, and that one's that's great. That's a good like kids.
So here really shows the stage of life I'm in. All the resources I can think of are kid ones.
Yeah, that's fine.
The only one
it's such a family time. I don't know.
Yes, the only one I can think of that isn't like a kid one is a compilation, and I think it was Nestigan that compiled it, but it's a compilation of Luther's writings. Ooh, now I can't remember what it's called exactly. I'm looking at my bookshelf here somewhere.
Yeah,
it's something about a manger.
Send it to me. That one would be that. I haven't heard of that. That would be really great.
It's tiny too, so it's doable. It's like this thick and like this big.
I like that.
So.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, obviously, Fleming Rutledge's book on Advent. It's like an intro and then some of her sermons, and it's a little bit like you could. I think the intro is really good, and you could like jump around in the sermons, but that's definitely like a little bit more heady. I know that Tish.
You got to be the right kind of person for that one.
Yeah. Tish Harrison Warren.
Yeah.
Or is it Warren Harrison? She just came out with a book on Advent, and I know that it's specifically kind of talking about the three comings. So I haven't read that yet, but
man, do I love her liturgy in the ordinary.
Yeah, she's a fantastic writer.
Has an Advent devotional as well, which again, this just shows how bad I am at this, that I haven't finished it, so I can't fully recommend it, but
yeah,
it's in the waiting. Almost, not yet, already. Haven't finished it. It's not done yet.
So.
And then the only other one I would mention for kids that, again, we're like, I'm just recommending a bunch of stuff I haven't used, but I know that our friends over at Storymakers have an Advent calendar. I think it's new this year, so that would be maybe something if you wanted something for your family to check out. But there's tons of resources out there. 1517 also has free Advent resources this year.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Free personal devotional that you could do during Christmas season. Actually, it's a little bit more of a Christmas devotional. So if you haven't gotten it yet, go get it on the website and you can just start it now. It's
free.
It's great.
It's free.
It's free.
So
yeah.
You're not losing anything.
Nope. Not at all. All right, guys. Thanks so much for being here. This has been so fun. And thank you for making it through all the technical difficulties that we've had today. So
the light was my favorite.
that was the best one by far. Of all the technical difficulties we had today, that was the best one. Outside Ourselves is a 1517 podcast. To learn more about all of our podcasts and all of our shows, please go to 1517.org/podcast. In the countdown to Christmas Day, I know that we have a ton of Christmas and Advent content coming out over at the 1517 website. So if you have not checked that out, I would highly encourage you to go check out and browse our free articles, as well as all of the shows that we produce over at 1517. If you liked today's Outside Ourselves, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen. Leave us a review. That's a really quick and easy way to support the show and make sure that others find our content as well. And if you are watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the Kelsi Climbera channel. That's where all of the Outside Ourselves shows come out on a bi-weekly basis. And I also have other original content coming out there as well. I hope you have a really Merry Christmas and enjoy that dead zone in the last 2 weeks of the year where no one gets anything done. And I look forward to seeing you with all new shows after my maternity leave in 2024.